My name is Douglas. I'm an accountant for a large tech company in Seattle. My climbing group consisted of Lenny, a high school friend of mine, Brandon, a painter, and Kelly, a botanist that does research for the state university. There's a mountain in Washington state that my climbing group and I have wanted to climb for a while. I won't say the mountain so you guys won't test my story, but if you figure it out, please don't do what we did. A bunch of us conveniently had our vacation time lined up, and we were all itching to climb this mountain together. We usually go climbing at least twice a year, recently climbing Kilimanjaro as one of our biggest expeditions to date. We haven't been able to climb together for a while, so we looked up if the mountain was open. It was closed for another 3 weeks, which was odd considering the weather was perfect. Light snowfall, dry switchbacks, and not too much wind at the peak. Since this mountain was so close to where we all lived, and we've never summited it together as a group, we decided to risk it. If we drove out and got turned around, it wouldn't be a big deal. We'd probably have dinner together at a local all-you-can-eat buffet, or find a smaller peak to hike up. We all climbed up this mountain before by ourselves, so we were all very familiar with the terrain and trails. We were confident we could do it safely on our own, so we got our gear together, pulled into Lenny's car, and drove to the base of the mountain. A little over an hour later, we reached a steel gate, the kind that swings in and out over the road with spikes on the front to mess up any car that tries to drive through. The car park's locked up. Guess we got to turn around, Kelly said. I noted that there was a chain around swinging on the gate, but no lock. I told the group to wait for me, and I hopped out the car. I ran over to the chain holding the gate closed, and removed the stick holding the chain in place, and swung the gate open. The car rolled through, and I replaced the chain stick and hopped back in. That's weird. Why wouldn't they lock it? Brandon asked. We all shrugged, but returned to normal conversation, just pleased we made it through. For the next half an hour, we drove up winding and washboard roads, stopped to pee and take pictures here and there. We ran to the last corner before the parking lot. Lenny noticed first. Guys, look, someone's in the info booth. We all squinted to look through the dusty windshield, and we all made out the same picture. A park ranger, on the skinny side, was happily tapping beat out on his clipboard and smiling at us. You know when you get caught walking through the halls at school by the teacher whose class you're skipping, you don't know what to say, as almost anything that leaves your mouth will just make the situation worse. That's how we felt. Lenny somewhat used that feeling, and spoke up when we reached the booth. Hey, he said cheerfully, to mask his worry. Hey guys, heading up the mountain today? The ranger asked. Lenny paused for a second. Yep. As long as it isn't closed. We saw somewhere that it might be closed. Is that true? Lenny said. If it's closed, I shouldn't be here, the ranger laughed. They better pay me overtime if that's the case. The car faked a laugh. Our eyes darted nervously at each other. Was the mountain actually open? Seems pretty empty here. Where is everyone? Lenny asked, gesturing towards the absence of cars in the lot. I don't know. Quiet season, I guess. More mountain for us, he said, winking. Might go up myself today if I get a chance. I just love the mountain. It's beautiful this time of year. Maybe we'll see you on the trail, Brandon yelled from the back. Hope so, the ranger said. Let me just take your names down. How long do you plan on staying? Just take a hike or overnight, he asked. Overnight, snow camping hopefully, I said. That's Kelly and Brandon in the back, Lenny driving and me, Douglas. The ranger scribbled our info down on his clipboard and slammed it on the table when he finished. Great, be safe, have fun and enjoy the mountain, he called out. We nodded politely and drove into a parking spot. No one really said anything, but we were all really thinking the same thing. Nothing about that conversation felt normal, or safe, or even comfortable, and everything just felt off. I guess we were just happy that we didn't get kicked off the mountain. Lenny brought up the ranger about 10 minutes into our hike, but that conversation quickly died down. The first hour of the hike were normal, and we sort of forgot about the weird parking lot encounter. About halfway up the switchback portion of the mountain, before the glacier-covered peaks, Kelly started feeling sick. We chalked it up to altitude sickness, but found it weird that a seasoned climber like her would feel sick this low. We weren't high up at all. She insisted we keep going. We made it this far already, and don't let me spoil your fun, she said. We camped lower on the mountain than we hoped to let Kelly rest. She was really pale, and needed to take breaks more frequently than usual, so we set up a camp right on the edge of the snow. Lenny stayed with Kelly while Brandon and I took our backpacks and walked up the glacier to see with our binoculars. From our elevated position, we could see most of the surrounding landscape. Rolling hills at the foot of the mountain, raging glacier runoff, and the sea of trees that stretched beyond the horizon. Sadly, we didn't spot any wildlife, but we had a laugh making David Attenborough-esque jokes while observing Kelly and Lenny mope around the camp. The wind died down just enough for Brandon and I to hear a strange clicking noise coming from behind us in the face of the mountain. It sounded similar to river rocks bouncing off each other, but it had a strange tempo to it. I looked at the source of the sound and saw someone sort of thrashing around on a patch of exposed gravel and rocks. His rhythm was sort of rhythmic, but still erratic, like a robot copying dance moves. He slowly turned towards us, and once he was totally facing Brandon and I, we could see that it was the park ranger we saw earlier. Brandon and I watched in curiosity and horror as the park ranger jerked and twisted, kicking rocks and jumping up and down. He noticed us and stopped dancing immediately and waved. He motioned for us to come up with him with a big smile on his face. Against every instinct, every gut feeling, Brandon and I couldn't help but join him on his patch of rocks. It was like we were on an escalator, and the way our legs effortlessly just carried ourselves to him. "Beautiful up here, isn't it?" the ranger asked. He had his hands on his hips, and his chest puffed out in a sort of exaggerated parody of a proud parent. "Oh, for sure," Brandon and I said. I could tell that he was locked in the same sort of trance I was in. I wanted to scream at him to run, kneel down the others to call for help, but I was frozen. "Yeah, I love it out here. Beautiful time of year," I heard myself say. It was like someone was using my mouth to speak. I had no control over what I said. The ranger took a deep breath, but it looked wrong the way he did it. His shoulders just sort of shrugged and he arched his back unnaturally, like it was someone imitating someone breathe. It didn't occur to me at the time, but I only saw him ever inhale, besides when he spoke. His chest would just collapse, but no air would escape. I tried with everything I had in me to pick up my legs and run, but it was as if I had stepped in concrete. I could barely wiggle, like I only had 1 millimeter of space around my body to move. "Glad you guys could come up here for a bit. I love company. Job gets lonely sometimes," he said. With his last sentence, he kicked a pebble down the mountain like a disappointed kid. We all stood in silence for what felt like 20 minutes before I squealed out the only sentence I could manage to say. "Who are you?" Brandon's eyes shot towards mine, as if I did something horribly wrong. If he'd looked scared before, now he looked mortified. "How about the weather? They should open the park earlier. Folks miss out on a good 3 weeks of clear skies," the ranger said. That did it. I broke free. I nearly tackled Brandon over, trying to drag his stiff body away from the ranger. We tumbled a few meters down the glacier in a tangled mess. "Going so soon? Stay here for a bit. Take in the view," the ranger called out, cupping his hands in front of his mouth. Still unable to speak, I pulled as hard as I could against Brandon's locked-up frame. He too soon broke free and joined me running down the glacier in silence. The ranger didn't follow us, but kept inviting us back to his spot. I honestly don't remember what he was saying, and with every step I took, it got harder and harder to breathe. A strange pressure was building up in my head, and my vision was slowly tunneling. By the time we reached our camp, I was almost completely blind, save for a drinking straw-sized circle of vision. I barreled into the tent's nylon wall and screamed with everything that I could at Lenny and Kelly. "We have to go, now!" "What's going on?" yelled Lenny from inside the tent. I tore the door open and saw Lenny bent over Kelly's pale, unconscious body. "She's in real bad shape," started mumbling, and then fell asleep. "She's super cold. Like, dead cold. What happened to you?" Lenny said. He looked up at us and down, grimacing as if we'd been in a brutal car crash. "That ranger. He's here. Something's wrong. We just need to go," I said. "And leave her," Lenny said. "I feel like moving her would kill her. We need to call for help." "Maybe we can get an airlift," I said. "Where's your satellite phone?" "My bag, in my tent," he said, pointing to the blue tent a bit higher up the mountain, pitched in a flat patch of gravel. I ran as fast as I could towards the door facing us. It was only until I got within 10 feet of it that I noticed. A face pressed hard against the door facing me from inside the tent. The ranger. Its open mouth and eyes were pressed hard against the nylon surface. I quietly unhooked the ice axe from my belt and tiptoed towards the tent before swinging as hard as I could into his face. It felt like I hit a block of ice the way it shattered and splintered all over inside the tent. A horrible, grotesque scream followed. It made my eyes water and my chest shake. It was so high-pitched that I could feel my bones vibrate. Whatever was in the tent began savagely ripping up the walls, thrashing and kicking like a trapped animal. It was clawing at the door, trying to find the zipper. I ran, screaming for my friends to run and follow me. We left our tents, gear, and Kelly behind as we scrambled down the mountain as fast as possible. We spent more time tumbling down the face of the mountain than on our feet, but it didn't matter. We reached the parking lot covered in deep gouges from falling on the rocks and roots. Lenny started the car and slammed on the accelerator. We took corners at impossibly fast speeds, slammed into jagged sides of the mountain, carved away to make the road. We even crashed through the gate at the bottom of the hill, which ruined our radiator and sprayed hot coolant all over inside of our car. We drove into town, our car scratched and smoking, and pulled into a parking lot where we threw up and cried. We woke up in the hospital. We told the police we lost control on the back road and that Kelly was with us the whole time. The police searched the mountain and found nothing. No gear, no tents, no Kelly, just footprints all over the surface of the glacier. Despite all of this, the park and mountain are opened up 3 weeks later on schedule without issue. I stopped reading updates about the mountain stuff when I learned that a new employee named Kelly joined as the newest member of the park rangers that year. It said that she was a botanist and wanted to study the flora of the park. Lenny and I never spoke to each other after we left the hospital, and the last I heard of Brandon, he quit his job and moved back with his parents in Florida. I still work for the same company. It's been almost a year since this happened, and I have time off coming up again. I feel drawn to that mountain still. It's not open for a couple more weeks, but I know it's not locked, and I know I'll be allowed in. And anyways, I have a conversation to finish up with a particular ranger. I've always considered myself a quiet man, one who prefers solitude and peaceful relaxation over the droning hum of the cities or the pounding bass of nearby drunken parties. That's why I moved up here to the upper peninsula of Michigan and took up a position as a park ranger in Porcupine Mountain State Park. Sure, there's not much for a 34-year-old guy to do with his dog, but ever since my wife passed, the wilderness has treated me just fine. Shepard's been here with me since I moved here those 7 years ago. He's my best friend, and being a German Shepherd was pretty well suited for this type of climate and environment. As far as the job goes, most days are pretty routine, usually nothing more than rowdy campers breaking minor rules, occasionally responding to fire calls, and the less common manhunt for a lost hiker. Black bears are common in the area, so there were a few times I happened to come across an unfortunate camper who thought you were supposed to play dead should you find yourself under attack. Unfortunately, those folk learn pretty quickly that particular strategy doesn't work with that breed of bear. It's always a pity to lose a camper to the wild, and metaphorical insult is added to literal injury when paperwork and phone calls consume the rest of my days in those cases. Thankfully, those sort of calls are rare, as bears are more likely to saunter away from people rather than become aggressive, but apart from that, there's not much else to be said about my job. The state government issued me a nearby cabin in which I live, and it's where I spend the majority of my time, only leaving occasionally to stock up on groceries or firewood from the offsite, and to head to the main office for a couple of days a week. Things have been pretty quiet lately. The weather was starting to get cold as the spring warmed and the cool autumn breeze of Lake Superior blew in from the north. With tourism slowing due to the cold weather, I was able to spend the majority of my days reading and listening to the silence, broken every so often by a breeze moving through the treetops, their leaves dancing finely to the tune of their rustling. Today had been particularly quiet, with only a handful of groups of nightmare campers in the entire park, and the day staff being able to manage most, if not all, of the wandering night sleepers. I was able to lose sight of my books without too much worrying and hear my radio go off. The pulsating glow of the fire sitting in front of me was mostly obscured by my book, but would sometimes manage to flare up just enough to remind me to keep it going. Stalking it didn't serve to stay its hunger, but only to rally its appetite for fuel, acting as though it was a living thing. It hissed angrily and doubled in size for a second before sheepishly shrinking back down. I tossed my book down, let out an exasperated sigh as I made for firewood. I stood over what firewood I had left, and I radioed down to HQ with my ranger number, 26 to base. This is base. What's up, David? I recognised Phil's voice coming through the handset. Phil, I've got to run down to the market real quick for some firewood, and I'm going to grab some groceries while I go out too. Going to be about an hour, maybe 2. Sure thing. I whistled to Shepard as I walked towards my truck. He immediately jumped over and beat me to the door, his tail demonstrating his exuberance, and it smacked up against the vehicle. The drive wasn't too long, about 20 minutes. but trips off the park were few and far between, so Shepard would eagerly come along whatever trip he was going on. All that meant for him was more attention, not to mention the handful of trees the workers would give him. After unloading my groceries and throwing a few pieces into the fire pit, I piled the rest of the firewood next to my cabin before drawing a tarp over the pole to keep the wood dry. As the evening drew nearer and the sun began slowly descending into the horizon, I armed myself with my radio and a book and loaded some kindling into the fire pit and lighting. I turned my chair to face the bluff overlooking the nearby valley. Copper Lake, colloquially named by the miners that used to inhabit this region, was positioned in the valley so perfectly that it took on a reddish brown hue from the light of the setting sun. In the fall, the effect was only exasperated by the red and orange of the forest, giving Copper Lake the illusion of being an actual lake of molten copper. The amber light washed over me and bathed my little home in shades of sepia, the inside of my eyelids a relaxing shade of orange. I was woken by Shepard barking at me before shifting his attention and barking aggressively at my radio handset. There was a hissing coming through the radio with a voice buried underneath. I didn't immediately pick up on what was happening, but then I was able to make out the voice. Whoever it was sounded panicked and out of breath. Please, can anyone hear me? Mayday, SOS, they shouted between gasps of breath. Oh god, it was already dark. Adrenaline took over as I picked up my handset. Yes, I can hear you, what's wrong? Where are you? Campers' radios will sometimes come through the radio if they're not on the same frequency, but it's hardly ever anything of substance. Please, you've got to help me. There's something here. Where are you? I repeated. The possibilities ran through my head. Had he disturbed a bear? It was late enough in the year, and they were beginning to hibernate for the winter, but that hadn't stopped people from waking up from their slumber before. I'm by water. There's a small mountain. Rusting of clothes and trembling fingers on zippers made their presence through the transmitted sound waves. I'm south of the mountain, and there's water here. I'm waving a light around, and wouldn't you know it, I saw a slight light flickering down in the valley below. I see you. Stay there. I'm on my way. I quickly threw my coat, grabbed my handgun, and made my way off the cliff. There was a steep incline on the cliff that extended down to the valley below. I slid down it before for quick access to the area, and now seemed like a good time to use that. I gathered only a few scratches and scrapes on my arm from the descent down the cliff, and hurried and leapt up and continued in the direction of the light I'd seen by the lake. Shepard hopped down 2 different rocks and ledges to keep up with me. I knew these woods well, and had ventured down the alleys before. As I approached the lake, my pace slowed until I was quietly walking through the brush, listening for any signs of distress. Nothing. It was as if this person had already disappeared. There were no signs of life immediately apparent to me down by the water. Then I heard it. A gunshot. One long gunshot. The implications drawn from which were never good thoughts. Tentatively, I made my way towards the sound, leading me directly to the cliff face on the opposite side of the ravine. Keeping my flashlight aimed low, I studied the surrounding woods as I made my way to the rocky piece. Nothing still. Then another gunshot, although this one was much closer, as if it was fired directly into my head. I spun around, and as I pulled my handgun from its holster, only to find that it didn't come right from behind me, it came from what was behind me in the rocks. A cave. Something felt strange somehow, and I never noticed this cave before. How many times have I lost a missing person because they might have ventured into this cave? I relaxed my grip and pulled my flashlight from my belt, crossing my arms and steadying my aim with my left arm that was now shining a light into the inky black. A hungry darkness consuming the light from my flashlight. The darkness was almost palpable, as if there was a shadow standing directly in front of me. Inching into the mouth, I called out, "Hello, are you in there?" No response. Of course, I mumbled, to no one in particular. The entrance to the cave was fairly sizable, about 8 feet tall and maybe 3 feet wide. As I moved forward, the soft ground turned into hard rock, my boots making a soft click with each step. It was a therapeutic sound for me. Shepard started growling and whining at the portal in front of me. He was never a fan of caves, something to which I had become accustomed. I was starting to get discouraged as I cautiously made my way into the cave, looking back to find him lying, whimpering, still as his eyes begged me not to go. There was nothing of interest so far, no signs that led me to whoever had taken refuge here, no signs that a bear had made his way to the abode. Nothing. The air was simultaneously heavy and light, like if you were to stir up a mixture of oil and water. They weren't combined, just kind of entwined. I can't really describe how the atmosphere felt. I didn't allow myself any time to dwell on it. The soft clap of my boots echoed faintly off the walls with each step deeper into the unknown. The air started to grow heavier, and the familiar smell of rotten animal started to make its way into my nose, lending more credibly to what I thought I'd found myself venturing into a den of a local bear. Step by step, I moved through the tunnel until I entered the cavern. The natural rocky dome dripping down onto the floor in various spots within the massive open area. The walls reverberated their sing-song drips off rocky walls and harmonised with each soft step as I circled into the perimeter. There was something there, a sound buried under the echoing drips and rock beneath my feet, much akin to walking on fresh heavy snow. I shined my light onto the source of the nose, and then I saw it. Slumped before me, under the harsh eye of my flashlight, was a creature, humanoid in size, but far from it in appearance. Its skin was grey and tattered, with putrid flesh hanging loose from its body, like rotten meat on the bones of a long dead carcass. Two spindly legs protruded from its body, bent beneath it unnaturally, with the help of an extra knee on each of the thing's legs. The creature's arms bore a similar appearance. An extra joint caused its arms to arch in front of it, where they ended in a massive clawed hands, hovering over a mangled mass of flesh and bone. Its head was looking down towards a body in front of it, which I now recognised to be a bear, the lifeless animal's fur strewn from its corpse. The creature dug one hand into the pile in front of it and slowly drew out a fistful of meat. The squelching sounds of raw meat sent shivers through me, and almost drowned out the pounding of my heart within my own eardrums for a second. It slowly drew its hand up to its face, while simultaneously turning to face me. It was only now that I got a good look at his face. Dear God, his face. Its eyes were large and a horribly bright shade of yellow. A piece of skin under its eye was so loose, I swear I could see the white shade of bone. This thing looked at me, and it smiled. Its teeth were like that of a deep-sea anglerfish, long, needle-like, and menacing, with bits of flesh hanging between the roots of its teeth. "Oh good, you're here. Please come and join me, won't you?" It spoke in the distressed voice I'd come to rescue. Nanoseconds passed before I'd forgotten about my drawn firearm and dropped it onto the floor. Fight immediately became flight, and I did what any human with an instinct would live to do. I ran. Claws scraped along rocky walls behind me, and the stomping of my boots resonated in my ears heavily until each exhale and gasp for air would drown it out, granting me for a moment of mental escape as adrenaline moved my numb legs in a flurry. The skittering and scraping followed as I found my way back to the entrance and burst through the valley door to the copper lake. Fresh air rapidly replaced the stale and fetid air that had filled my lungs just a moment ago. I bolted past Shepard as he quickly turned and followed. Barks and cries were paired with the frantic sprinting of his four soft paws against the soft earth as we raced to the cliff, as we described earlier, to reach the valley. I saw Shepard in the corner of my eye as he raced to the regular path of the cliff. I was too panicked to look behind me as I began to climb, rhythmically sinking my fingernails into the earth and scaling the incline as I slid down earlier. The earth and nature I'd become to love was the only thing that separated me from the refuge of my home. There was no sign of my dog when I reached the top. The cliff wasn't too large, and he'd beaten me up to the top multiple times over the years. I ran into my cabin and slammed the door behind me. I watched for Shepard to batter out the path like I normally would, but there was no sign of him. There was no sign of anything. My heart sank as I continued to peek out my windows, but still, I saw nothing. I sat on my bed and passed out from fear and shock within seconds. Every night since then, I can hear a pair of long, sharp claws scratching against my house, in one long, methodical circle of the perimeter. The scratching stops, and I peek out my window, only to see a pair of yellow eyes watching me from the nearby trees. Those motionless yellow eyes match mine, and I see the moonlight reflect off its awful, toothy grin. It's been a week now. No one's come by to check on me. My radio yields nothing but soft static, and there's still no sign of Shepard. I'm running low on supplies, and there's nothing else I can do now. I'm going to make a break for my truck to try and get out of here. I just need to beat this thing to my truck. I have no other choice. A few years ago, my friend Tez and I set out on a great American road trip. We were going to drive from New York to Los Angeles, zigzagging through the country for 6 weeks. We were both in our early 20s, pretty broke, and as my mum had been a long haul trucker, I suggested that to save a ton of money we should sleep in the back of our hatchback. It was a pretty cosy setup. We brought some blankets and sheets at Goodwill and cut them up into curtains. By the end of the first week, we'd gotten so we could set up a camp in about 10 minutes. Luggage moved into the front, curtains up, bedding laid down and out for the night. We slept in parking lots, free campsites, rest areas, basically anywhere it seemed safe and semi-legal. There was never a night, after the first night, where we felt scared, until the last week of the trip in Arizona. We were near Flagstaff, and had gotten pretty used to our routine. We would go on a set schedule, and we would never drive for more than 3 or 4 hours a day. No destination really in mind, outside a few must-see landmarks. We'd drive to places we found the night before on Google, and take suggestions from other campers, locals, and people we met. We'd also gotten very good at making friends. We went to Denny's with a group of rednecks we met at a campsite, in the back of their pickup, because I got hungry and overheard them saying where they're gonna go. We met an 80-year-old cowboy who took us out drinking and taught us how to line dance at a country bar, played the guitar with some musicians in the middle of a thunderstorm, got fed breakfast and dinner by a ton of campers who invited us to hang out with them, spent the 4th of July with a family who basically adopted us into their campsite. Grandma gave us some weed candy. Basically every encounter we had with a stranger was a positive one. This night didn't look to be any different. We found a free campsite on Google and drove up into the woods, following our GPS. We were pretty far out of town, and something seemed a little bit off when we pulled up to the campsite. There was one RV parked, and 2 cars further up in the trees. We pulled up near the RV, and a man opened the door. Tez waved hello, and he just stared at her. His expression was completely blank. Then, as if she hadn't said anything, he just slowly closed the door again, staring at us the entire time. Figuring he just wanted some privacy and thought we'd be obnoxious, we pulled further down the road and found a flat spot to park the car. Instead of setting up our routine of setting up camp immediately while it was still light out, we goofed around for a while, smoking and laughing and taking dumb photos of ourselves. Tez pointed out a campfire further down the campsite, and we decided to go be friendly. We'd met so many cool people in the previous 5 weeks by just going up and offering a beer or just chatting, so we wandered over. Near the campsite there were 2 men, the owners of the cars we'd seen earlier. They seemed friendly and we sat down and chatted with them. They were drinking and smoking, and we sat down and had a beer with them. One of the men seemed pretty off, and we came to find out that 2 of the men didn't actually know one another. The older man was definitely on some sort of drugs. He was spinning in circles and talking about UFOs, however he seemed harmless. This left us chatting with the younger man, who claimed to be a former park ranger. He was handsome and easygoing. We spent several hours just chatting about our trip, families and everything. Then he started talking about the bear. He'd seen a bear earlier in the forest. Tess didn't believe him, and he pulled out his camera to show her photos of the bear. It was very close to the campsite, and we both were a little freaked out. It wasn't unheard of for one of us to get up to go to the bathroom in the middle of the night, so the idea of a bear hanging around in the night spooked us out. The ranger just laughed, and then his expression completely changed. It's hard to describe, but his voice seemed somehow cold. He said, "If you get out of your car in the middle of the night, it's not the bear you should be worried about." I kept waiting for the laugh, or for him to nudge Tez with his elbow. Jokes on the foreigner and the city girl, right? He never did. I laughed awkwardly, and made a dumb joke about a serial killer in the woods. My friend laughed as well and joked about the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. We moved on to another subject, but within 5 minutes the ranger had come back to it, and was talking about something, grabbing us from our car in the middle of the night. No matter how we tried to steer the conversation away from serial killers, he kept latching back on. The older man was high as a kite, and at this point was staring at the stars, not talking. We'd just awkwardly laugh and sip our beer, and try to get the conversation going somewhere else. Then the ranger stood up and walked towards the cooler to get another beer. At this point it's pitch black out, and I can't see anything outside the circle of light from the campfire. The beer cooler was outside the circle. Suddenly there's a red dot in the darkness, and it took a moment for me to realise it's a camera. The ranger is holding a camera. He had taken a photo of us. I could see the screen on his camera light up. Now, it wasn't odd for people who we met to ask to take pictures with us. My friend Tez is gorgeous, dark hair, blue eyes, like a young Megan Fox, and we were friendly. People like having photos of themselves. It was an entirely strange thing to have this person taking photos of us without asking or even indicating that that's what he's doing. We were both staring at him like a deer in headlights at this point, but instead of realising what he's doing is a bit weird, he checks his camera, adjusts some things and takes another photo, this time with a flash. not asking us to smile, not proposing a group photo, and no explanation. After this photo he comes back to the fire and sits down, not a word about the photo. At this point me and Tez are mutually freaked out. We make up some BS excuse that we need to go and set up a campfire and nope the hell out. When we stand to leave, the UFO guy smiles and says to have a good night. The ranger however smiles at us, with a smile that doesn't reach his eyes, and says, "Be careful out there, there's more than bears in the woods." Every hair in my body stood on end. I wasn't alone in my discomfort either, because Tez laughed a response out and pulled me away from the campfire towards the car. We rushed back to the car, which we only found in the dark by referencing the RV, and jumped in the front seats. My friend Tez is all but hyperventilating. "Why did he take pictures of us?" I was shaking. I responded, "I read that some serial killers sometimes warn their victims." She stared at me for a second and locked the car doors. "Do you think he just took victim photos?" We both freaked out. She's in a full panic and turns the headlights on in the car. I immediately yelled at her to turn them off because he knows exactly where our car is. God knows why, but that's the only night we hadn't set up camp. We didn't need to tear anything down, so we just put the car in drive and floored it out of the campsite. As we got to the end of the dirt road, Ranger was walking towards our car with that same cold expression. Big fan of the subreddit for lurkery. This happened to me a few years ago, and I don't often talk about it since it's weird and gory and not the kind of story you whip out at cocktail parties, but here it goes. A couple of years ago I was stressed out from college and big city life and decided to spend a long weekend in the woods doing what my city friends consider utter lunacy and us outdoorsy people consider nirvana. Deep woods free camping, in the winter alone. While that sounds like the beginning of a missing persons report, if you're an experienced outdoorsman, it's pretty safe. I also take a secret pleasure in being the white trash warrior-ass my dad always hoped I'd be. I always hated the feeling of claustrophobia that came with being a female in the city, avoiding eye contact, not walking alone at night. When you're a girl out in the woods, you're in charge. You're safe within the warm embrace of your own solitary freedom, or so I thought. I spent a few hours on the roads, the surroundings getting wilder and wilder as I drove. I parked in an allowed roadside ditch, with a compass and a map, hiked until I was in a mile's reach of some good ice fishing. I was at least 4 miles from the road. I made an extremely discreet camp in a clearing, with just one little hole in the snow for my tiny tent and my tiny campfire. After a couple of beautiful days of just hiking and relaxing around camp, I made the trek to the fishing hole. Everything was in utter winter stillness. The air was crisp, and the only signs that I wasn't in a perfect vacuum were the twitterings of birds and very different rumblings of half-frozen waterfalls. After a mile or so of crunching along in the snow, I silently celebrated my compass skills when I came out at the exact place I'd intended to. I punched a hole in the thinnest crust of ice and started to fish. My first catch came so quickly. After a few weeks under a frozen surface, the fish are hungry. I was feeling oddly fatigued and jumpy, so I decided to just clean the fish here and now, and take it straight back to camp to cook. I quickly realised my fish preparation skills were rusty at best. I cursed my lack of preparation as I cut myself for the second time. Something in my peripheral senses was irritating me, but I was very set at my task, focusing on the motions in the slippery mess. The thing in periphery was growing more irritating, like the buzzing of a fly or the yammering of a sibling. I carved and hacked and sliced my hand open freshly as a fish slipped out of my hands and into the snow. Frustrated I shouted, "F off with that whistling, will you?" Silence resumed, and then my heart stopped. Living in a college neighbourhood, I had grown accustomed to white noise that I had failed to recognise how grossly inappropriate this sound was in context. The silence weighed down on me as I broke into a sweat. The only reason a human would be this deep into the woods would be to hunt, and no hunter would give himself away like that. And if he was whistling for any other reason, shouldn't he have reacted to my outburst, yelled something vulgar back, apologised? No, nothing. Just total silence in the woods. Silence as pure as it was before I spoke. Unsure if I'd misheard the tweetings of a bird or something, I decided the fish was a lost cause, slung my gear over my shoulder and headed for camp. I trudged off in the woods, and about a quarter of a mile from camp, I saw a large mass protruding from the snow. Apprehensive but drawn, like a moth to a flame, I trudged up to what materialised in the closing distance as a moose kill. A really good moose kill. A clean shot through the upturned eye, staring at me and saying something that was imposing a sense of dread on me, but a dread I couldn't translate.
I ran. I ran hard and fast, in the snow in the woods. Everything looked the same. I knew I was moving south, and I knew I'd passed camp on the east. I made for the road, eventually slowing down to a weary trudge, calming at the comforting sight of the woods clearing ahead, to make way for the country roadway. I looked to my left and saw my car 50 yards or so down, jogged to it, and drove the lonely 15 miles to the first motel. I had none of my belongings, and no earthly idea of why I'd just abandoned my ship like that. It was only as I was sitting up watching infomercials at night that it started to fall together. Why would the park service issue free camp passes for the same stretch of woods that allowed hunting? The moose defied everything of my rudimentary understanding of hunting, even the snow to call it. Decomp starts quickly on an animal that size. You'd have time for a few quick pictures, but then you want to have it dressed quickly. Why would you want to kill a moose 5 miles into the forest? How could you ever drag it back to the road? In the morning, in a sleep-deprived and paranoid state, I described everything I'd seen and thought I'd heard to a very confused park ranger. He seemed more vexed about illegal hunting than any of my other crazy city girl ramblings. He said he wanted to come and pick me up and had me take him to where I thought the kill site was. I said I was only going if he brought a gun. He sighed and told me when to meet him. We rode into the woods on an ATV, with me awkwardly riding on the back, as if I was on the back of the world as awkward as motorcycle. We got to a large impression in the snow, where the moose had been. Blood was everywhere. There was also the distinct track of the carcass being dragged. The drag made a smooth trail in the snow, as if the carcass were on a tarp. The ranger said he should take me back now. He asked where my camp was. I pointed in the direction of the drag marks. It looked like he was finally sharing my unease. Back to the hotel, I washed my clothes in the sink and prepared my drive home in the morning. An unknown number called my phone. It was the park ranger. The moose had been dragged into my campsite. He described the scene as a huge mess. He wasn't sure if an animal would help make the mess, but one thing was clear. Someone had cut into my tent with a knife. I asked about the rest of my belongings. He said darkly, "You don't want them back. They're covered in moose mess." "So, what happens now?" I said. "Well, miss, you're gonna have to keep an eye out for this guy. I haven't heard or seen anything like this before. I'm really sorry this happened." And that was it. No closure, no explanation. In the years that have passed, I've tried different applications of reasons. A hunter who needed help, but knew I was already gone. A deranged psychopath looking for his second kill. One of the few friends I shared the story with envisioned him as some deep woods Sweeney Todd. He dubbed him Moosey Todd. I still don't know why I didn't hear the gunshot. The whistling seems so vivid in my memory, but was it even real? One question has definitely been answered. I'll never go back into the woods alone again. At the end of May 1999, I was headed into my freshman year of high school. That summer, me and a group of 6 girls from my church went on a mission trip up to the coast from Riverside, CA to Mount St. Helens, Washington. 3 of the girls' mothers acted as our drivers and chaperones. We basically all piled into an old Chevy van and a station wagon, headed up PCH, and had the trip of a lifetime. I got baptized at a historic mission in St. Louis, Ospido. We spent 3 days in San Francisco, saw the capital, Portland, Oregon, Yosemite. Basically we got to see every worthy landmark and stay in every noteworthy town from SoCal to the Canadian border. When we stayed in Yosemite National Park, we spent 3 nights at the Cheddar Lodge. While in Yosemite and sightseeing, the old Chevy van died in the middle of nowhere. Luckily, even though we were unable to get a cell signal within an hour, someone stopped and helped us. This was so long ago I don't remember all the details, but basically the owner of the van told us later that the mechanic told her that someone tampered with the engine. She was very upset by this and said it was something that had been done intentionally. The van had to be abandoned and we had to use a rental the rest of the way. I don't know if it's a coincidence, but it turns out Carrie Anthony Stainer, aka the Yosemite Killer, was the maintenance man for the Cheddar Lodge during this time. He had murdered and decapitated a park ranger by the time we were guests at the lodge. The very next month, he gained access to a room where a woman and her young daughter and her daughter's young friend were staying under the guise of checking the room for something. Basically, he knocked on the door in the middle of the night, and because he worked at the lodge, they opened the door. He abducted them, then did horrible things to them, murdered them and decapitated them. I can't say that I remember seeing him, but we probably did, as we were there for 3 nights. It's just one of those things I look back on and think he could have easily knocked on one of our doors, as it was just a few weeks before, and decided he wanted to abduct us and kill us. I feel incredibly lucky I dodged that bullet. If the time frame wasn't so close, it wouldn't creep me out as much, but it continues to haunt me 16 years later.